first time I realized my sister had taken control of the company I built. I was sitting in the parking lot outside the office with the engine off, staring through the glass at a logo I had sketched on a napkin 11 years earlier. My name was still on the old incorporation documents. My fingerprints were still on half the equipment inside. And there were still clients on the books who remembered me answering their calls at 2 in the morning when the company was nothing more than a folding table in my apartment. But when I looked through the window that afternoon, none of that seemed to matter anymore. My sister Lauren was standing in the lobby wearing the navy blazer she had started wearing to investor meetings, surrounded by 3 members of the management team, 2 people from the board, and a client I'd personally spent 6 months convincing to trust us. She was talking with the kind of confidence I used to have before I learned how expensive confidence could become when other people were willing to mistake it for ownership. I couldn't hear everything through the glass, but I heard enough when the door opened for one of the employees to leave. "We're finally getting the company where it needs to be," Lauren said. "The transition has been difficult, but we're past the worst of it." Then she saw me. She stopped talking. The employee beside her looked at me, then looked away. One of the board members gave me the same uncomfortable smile people give you when they already know the ending of a conversation you're about to have. Lauren walked toward the door, opened it, and said, "You shouldn't be here." Not "hey," not "what are you doing here," not even my name, just that. I looked past her at the reception desk, at the framed photograph of our first warehouse, at the wall where someone had recently hung a picture of Lauren shaking hands with a client. "This is still my company," I said. Lauren's expression barely changed. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that got you removed." She closed the door. I sat there for another 10 minutes listening to the engine tick as it cooled. And for the first time in my adult life, I understood what it felt like to be a stranger in a place you had built with your own hands. The company was called North Star Route Solutions, and if that name means nothing to you, that's probably because it wasn't some giant corporation. We were a specialized logistics operation serving regional manufacturers that needed something more complicated than ordinary freight but weren't large enough to build their own logistics departments. We coordinated time-sensitive parts, emergency shipments, vendor pickups, inventory transfers, and the ugly little problems that happen when a factory is 3 hours away from shutting down because one component didn't arrive. It was not glamorous. Nobody made movies about it, but it was profitable, and more importantly, it was reliable. That reliability was the entire reason North Star existed. I built the company because I'd spent my 20s watching manufacturers lose money because nobody wanted to handle the complicated middle ground between transportation companies, suppliers, and warehouses. I understood how dispatchers thought because I'd worked dispatch. I understood drivers because I'd spent years riding along with them. I understood purchasing managers because I'd sat across from them while they explained why a $700 emergency shipment could prevent a $200,000 production delay. I wasn't brilliant. I wasn't some business school prodigy. I was stubborn, organized, and obsessive about keeping promises. In the beginning, those qualities were enough. I started North Star at 21 with $1,200 in savings, a used laptop, a borrowed desk, and an old pickup truck that had a habit of overheating whenever the temperature climbed above 90 degrees. For the first year I did everything: sales in the morning, dispatch in the afternoon, billing at night, collections on weekends. If a driver got stranded, I went. If a client called at midnight, I answered. If a vendor demanded payment, I negotiated. I built spreadsheets because I couldn't afford software. I created checklists because I couldn't afford mistakes. I wrote down every failure because I couldn't afford to repeat one. The first major client was a small manufacturer outside Columbus, Ohio, called Hartwell Components. Their operations manager, Mike Redding, gave me a chance after 3 larger logistics companies had failed them. I remember sitting in his office with a notebook on my lap while he explained that their problem wasn't transportation. Their problem was that nobody owned the problem once something went wrong. I told him I would. He laughed. "That's an expensive promise for a guy with 1 truck." I told him I didn't own 1 truck. I owned a phone, a spreadsheet, and a willingness to answer it. He hired me for a 30-day trial. That 30-day trial became 11 years. North Star grew slowly. 5 clients became 11. 11 became 23. I hired my first dispatcher, then another. We moved into a real office. We leased warehouse space. We developed a system I called the chain map, a process for mapping every critical shipment against vendor dependencies, driver availability, backup carriers, warehouse receiving windows, and production deadlines. It wasn't revolutionary technology, It was simply a system I built after losing enough sleep to understand that logistics failures usually weren't caused by one big mistake. They were caused by 5 small assumptions nobody had written down. Chain Map turned those assumptions into documented procedures. That system became the backbone of the company. By the time North Star reached its 8th year, we had 47 employees, 12 regional clients, several national accounts, and enough recurring revenue to attract outside investment. That's when my sister Lauren entered the story in earnest. Lauren was 34 then, 2 years older than me, and she had always been the more socially competent sibling. Growing up, she could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new friends. I was the kid who stayed near the bookshelf. Our parents loved both of us, but they had a habit of seeing Lauren as the person who understood people and me as the person who understood work. That distinction never bothered me until it became a weapon. Lauren had been working in corporate marketing for a healthcare company in Chicago. She was good at presentations, networking, branding, and managing executives. When she came home for Thanksgiving one year, she asked me why North Star didn't have a real marketing department. I told her we didn't need one yet. She laughed. "You don't need one because you don't know how to market yourself." I laughed too. At the time, it sounded like sisterly teasing. A few months later, our father mentioned that Lauren was thinking about moving closer to home. She was unhappy with her job. She wanted something more meaningful. My mother said, "Why don't you bring her into North Star?" I immediately said no. Not because I didn't love Lauren, but because I'd learned the hard way that family and business were dangerous combinations. My mother looked at me like I'd insulted her. "She could help you. We already have a team. She's your sister." That sentence would eventually cost me more than any business mistake I'd ever made. Lauren joined North Star as Director of Client Development. I gave her a salary, a bonus structure, and clearly defined responsibilities. She wasn't an owner. She wasn't an executive officer. She wasn't a founder. She was an employee with a senior title because I wanted her to have enough authority to work effectively without pretending she had built something she hadn't. For the first 6 months, she was excellent. She improved our presentation materials. She helped redesign our website. She organized client dinners. She pushed me to stop hiding behind operations and actually talk about what North Star had accomplished. One evening, after a particularly successful investor presentation, she looked at me and said, "You know what your problem is?" I laughed. "Apparently I have several. You built something impressive and you're still acting like the guy who started it from his apartment." I remember that sentence because I liked hearing it. That's the embarrassing part. I liked hearing my sister tell me I'd built something impressive. I didn't understand that there was a difference between encouraging someone and gradually rewriting their history. The first credit theft was so small I didn't even consider it theft. We were pitching a manufacturing client called Redmont Industrial Supply. I had spent 3 months developing the proposal. The account required an unusually complicated distribution schedule, and I created a custom chain map model to show how we could reduce their emergency freight costs. Lauren joined the final presentation. When the client asked how we had developed the model, Lauren said, "We built it around our strategy." That wasn't technically a lie. We were both part of North Star. But when the client later complimented Lauren for developing such a smart operational framework, she didn't correct them. I noticed. I said nothing. A few weeks later, she described the Redmont account at a family dinner as one of the deals I landed. Again, I said nothing. My father smiled proudly. I knew Lauren would be good for the company. I remember cutting into my steak and thinking, she attended one presentation. Then I pushed the thought away. The account was profitable. That should have been enough. Except it happened again. Then again. She started calling Chain Map our methodology in a way that increasingly sounded like she had created it. Employees began going to her with questions about strategic decisions because she was more available than I was. I was buried in operations. We were growing quickly and I was working 60-hour weeks. Lauren had discovered something I hadn't fully understood. People naturally assign authority to the person who speaks most confidently. I knew the systems. She knew how to tell stories about them. The board loved her presentations. Investors loved her optimism. Clients loved how easily she could make complicated problems sound simple. I didn't dislike any of that. In fact, I was grateful. The first time she interrupted me in a meeting, I thought she was helping. We were discussing a new warehouse contract when I started explaining why the proposed lease terms were dangerous. Lauren jumped in. "What he's trying to say is that we need flexibility on the exit clause." I stopped. She continued. Everyone nodded. Afterward, I told her privately, "You don't have to translate me." She smiled. "I was just helping." "I know. You make everything more complicated than it needs to be." I laughed. "That's because somebody has to think about what happens after the PowerPoint." She laughed too. We hugged before leaving the office. Looking back, that was probably the first moment when I should have drawn a line. Instead, I rewarded her for crossing it by pretending I hadn't noticed. Over the next 2 years, Lauren became more involved with investors. She began attending board meetings. She started preparing quarterly presentations. She created an internal newsletter. She became the person employees saw at company events. Meanwhile, I kept doing what I had always done. I worked. I reviewed contracts. I checked client retention. I monitored service failures. I called vendors. I handled major escalations. I trained managers. I maintained relationships with the clients who had trusted us before we had investors. But those things were mostly invisible. Nobody clapped when I prevented a shipment failure at 2010. Nobody posted a photograph when I renegotiated a carrier agreement that saved us 6 figures over the year. Nobody cared when I spent 4 hours fixing a process that prevented 50 small problems later. Lauren's work was visible. Mine was structural, and visible work gets remembered more easily. Then came the investor meeting that changed everything. North Star had reached a point where we needed additional capital to expand into 2 new states. We were not desperate for money, but growth required investment. Lauren presented the 5-year plan. She spoke about culture, client acquisition, scalability, and operational transformation. She showed charts. She used phrases like, "our growth architecture," and "the framework we've built." At one point, an investor named Daniel Mercer asked, "Who designed the operational model that allows you to scale this way?" Lauren looked directly at him. "I did, with the team." I felt something inside me go cold, not because she had taken credit in front of investors. She had done that before. It was because she said it without hesitation. I looked around the room. Nobody corrected her. I could have corrected her. I could have said, "Actually, that framework predates Lauren by 7 years." Instead, I heard my mother's voice in my head. "She's your sister." Why does credit matter so much? So I stayed quiet. Daniel asked another question. Lauren answered. The meeting continued. We received the investment. The company grew. And my silence became part of the record. Months later, Lauren asked me to approve a new executive structure. She wanted the title of Chief Operating Officer. I told her I wasn't comfortable with it because she didn't actually run operations. She smiled and said, "Then what exactly do you think I've been doing?" I told her the truth. "You're doing client development, investor relations, and internal communications. That's valuable. But operations is different." Her face tightened. "You always do this." "Do what?" "You act like anything I accomplished doesn't count unless you personally built it." I stared at her. "That's not what I'm saying." "It is." "Lauren, I'm saying titles need to match responsibilities." She stood up. "You know what? This is why people are frustrated with you." That sentence stayed with me, not because I believed it completely, but because I couldn't prove it wasn't true. I had spent so long assuming my work would speak for itself that I had never learned how to defend myself against a story. Lauren had. Over the next year, she built that story carefully. She told employees that she had been trying to modernize North Star while I resisted change. She told investors that I was brilliant operationally but lacked the leadership skills needed for the company's next stage. She told clients that she had become the bridge between the old North Star and the new one. She never said I was incompetent. That would have been too obvious. She said I was tired, stubborn, overwhelmed, too attached to the way things had always been done. Every criticism contained just enough truth to make the larger lie believable. I was tired. I was stubborn. I hated unnecessary changes. I did work too much. I did have trouble delegating. Those flaws made her narrative stronger. The first employee to tell me something was wrong was Marcus, our operations manager. He came into my office one evening and shut the door. "You know people think Lauren is basically running the company, right?" I laughed. "That's ridiculous." Marcus didn't laugh. "I'm not saying she is. I'm saying that's what people think." I leaned back. "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me." "I hear it. From who?" clients, managers, people in sales. I rubbed my face. She's good at talking. Marcus nodded. Yeah, she is. There was something in his tone I didn't understand at the time. Later, I would realize he was already afraid to contradict her. I asked him if he thought she was trying to replace me. He looked at the floor. I don't know. Would you tell me if you did? He hesitated. I'd like to think so. That answer bothered me more than a direct accusation would have. I began paying closer attention. I found emails where Lauren referred to herself as the executive responsible for Northstar's operational transformation. I found investor notes describing her as architect of the company's scalable model. I found a presentation that called ChainMap Lauren's operating framework. I brought the presentation to her office. What is this? She glanced at it. Marketing language. It says you designed ChainMap. I helped evolve it. That's not what it says. She looked at me for a long moment. Do you want me to tell everyone you did everything? No. Then what's the problem? The problem is that you're taking credit for work you didn't do. She leaned back. Maybe you're finally realizing how much I've actually contributed. I know what you've contributed. Do you? Yes. Because sometimes I don't think you do. I left without an answer. That night, my father called. I expected him to ask what happened. Instead, he said, "Your sister called us." I closed my eyes. Of course she did. She says you two are fighting. We're having disagreements. She says you're angry because she's getting more recognition. I laughed bitterly. That's not why I'm angry. Then why are you angry? I started explaining. I talked about the documents, the investor presentations, the way she was describing ChainMap. My father listened. When I finished, he said, "She's your sister." I almost dropped the phone. Dad, that's not an answer. You're both successful. Why can't you share credit? Because it's not shared credit when she says she built something she didn't build. Does it really matter? I looked at the dark window beside my desk. I think it does. You're going to destroy the family over this? That question hurt because it turned the situation upside down. I wasn't threatening the family. I was trying to protect something I'd spent 11 years building. But I had no language for defending myself without sounding selfish. So I did what I'd always done. I swallowed it. I let Lauren become more visible. I let her speak for the company. I let the board believe she was the person who understood the future. I kept the machine running underneath everything. And because the machine kept running, nobody realized how much of the machine was me. The final move came without warning, although afterward I could see every warning sign. It was a Tuesday morning. I had a board meeting scheduled for 10. At 9:42, my assistant called and said the meeting had been moved to a conference room downtown. I asked why. She said Lauren had changed it. I drove there. When I entered the room, everyone was already seated. Lauren was beside Daniel Mercer. Our outside counsel was there. So was our CFO. Nobody looked at me. Daniel finally said, "We need to discuss your role going forward." I remember sitting down slowly. My role? Lauren folded her hands on the table. The board has concerns about leadership continuity. I looked at her. What concerns? Daniel spoke carefully. There have been questions about your ability to scale with the company. I almost laughed. The company is scaling because of the systems I built? Lauren didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The story had already been written. They offered me a reduced executive role, no longer controlling operations, with a buyout proposal that valued my ownership at less than I believed it was worth. I refused. Then they told me the alternative was a formal separation. I looked around the room for someone to say this was insane. Nobody did. My sister finally spoke. We're trying to protect what you've built. That was the moment I understood how completely she had rewritten reality. She was sitting across from me, preparing to remove me from my own company, and she believed she was doing me a favor. I asked one question. Who approved this? Daniel said, the board. I looked at the CFO. He looked down. I looked at our attorney. She avoided my eyes. Then I looked at Lauren. And you? She said I supported the decision. I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten anyone. I signed the documents required for the transition, took the box containing the few personal things from my office, and walked out. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. She had already heard. The message said, "Please don't make this worse." Lauren is trying to save the company. I stood there staring at those words while the elevator descended through 12 floors, and something inside me finally stopped fighting. I walked to my car, put the box on the passenger seat, and drove home. 3 days later, I received an email from Northstar asking me to confirm that all company property had been returned. I replied that everything had been returned. Then I opened the folder on my computer that I had maintained for years without ever imagining it would matter. It contained old contracts, dated proposals, original chain map documentation, intellectual property registrations, investor presentations, emails with clients, development records, vendor agreements, and years of correspondence showing exactly who had created what and when. I didn't create that folder because I expected revenge. I created it because 11 years earlier, when I was still the only employee, I had learned one simple rule. If something matters, document it. I closed the folder without opening anything else. I wasn't ready to use it. I wasn't even sure I ever would. For the first time since I was 21, I had no company to run the next morning. I thought that would feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like someone had removed the floor beneath me. I didn't know yet that while I was sitting alone in my apartment trying to figure out who I was without Northstar, my sister was walking into the office the following Monday, believing she had finally won. And I didn't know that the first client would call her before lunch with a question she couldn't answer. The first client called Lauren before lunch, and according to what I learned much later, the question wasn't complicated at all. It was something Mike Redding had asked me hundreds of times over the years. Who owns the exception? In Northstar's system, that question had a very specific meaning. If a shipment missed a pickup window, a supplier changed a production schedule, a driver became unavailable, or a receiving dock suddenly closed, someone had to become responsible for resolving the entire chain rather than simply fixing one isolated problem. That responsibility was one of the first things I'd built in the chain map because early in the company's history, I had learned that people loved solving the part of a problem that belonged to them and hated owning the part that belonged to everyone. Lauren apparently told Mike she would get back to him. He asked when. She said within the hour. She didn't know the answer. She called Marcus. Marcus didn't know either because I had always been the person who made the final exception decisions. She called the dispatcher who had worked there for 3 years. He knew how to execute the process, but he didn't know why certain exceptions were routed the way they were. Eventually, she called our former operations consultant, who had been retired for nearly 2 years, and he told her what he had told me when I first developed Chain Map. That's a founder question. Apparently, Lauren got angry. I didn't know any of this that week. I was too busy trying to figure out what unemployment felt like when you weren't unemployed because technically I had left with a negotiated separation package and still owned a minority interest in the company, but emotionally I felt like I had been fired from my own life. My apartment suddenly became too quiet. For 11 years, my phone had never stopped. There were always messages, alerts, calls, invoices, driver updates, client questions, vendor problems, somebody asking for a decision. Then there was nothing. The first morning I woke up without a reason to get out of bed before 7. I stared at the ceiling for almost an hour. At 8:12, I reached for my phone because I was convinced I had forgotten something. There was nothing. I opened my email, nothing from Northstar. I opened the old operations dashboard out of habit, then remembered my access had been revoked. That hurt more than I expected. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and watched the sunlight move across the floor. My father called around 9. I didn't answer. He called again. Then my mother. I finally picked up. "How are you?" my mother asked. I said, "Fine." She said, "You sound angry." "I'm not angry." "I'm not angry. Lauren says you haven't spoken to her." I laughed once. "She removed me from the company. She says the board made the decision. She supported it." Silence. Then my mother said, "Maybe this is for the best." I looked around my apartment. "Maybe you needed a break. Maybe you worked too much. Maybe." I realized I was agreeing with everything because I didn't have the energy to defend myself anymore. Then she said something that made me finally stop. "You should be proud of Lauren. She's taking Northstar to the next level." I didn't answer. "Are you there?" "Yeah. I just want you two to be okay." I said, "I don't know if we will be." She sighed. "Please don't make this about money." "It isn't about money." "Then what is it about?" I stared at the wall. "I don't know anymore." That was the honest answer. At the time, I thought I was grieving the company. Looking back, I think I was grieving the version of my family I had believed existed. I had always assumed that if things became serious enough, my parents would eventually see the truth. I had assumed that my sister could be ambitious without being dishonest. I had assumed that the people who had watched me build North Star would remember how it started. Those assumptions were gone. I spent the next several weeks doing almost nothing. I went running. I cooked. I cleaned my apartment. I watched documentaries I couldn't remember afterward. I answered occasional calls from former employees but avoided talking about North Star. Some were sympathetic. Some were careful. A few were strangely enthusiastic about Lauren. One former sales manager told me, "You know, she really believes she's doing the right thing." I said, "I know." He asked if I was going to fight. I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, if you do, be careful. She has people around her." That sentence stayed with me. She has people around her. I had spent 11 years building systems around the company. Lauren had spent 3 years building relationships around herself. I didn't know which was more powerful. The first person who genuinely helped me was a man named David Sloan. David had been one of my earliest mentors in logistics. He wasn't an investor, lawyer, or executive. He was a retired regional operations director who had once hired me when I was 23. He called me on a Thursday afternoon. "I heard." I said, "News travels fast. In logistics, everything travels fast except the thing you're actually waiting for." I laughed despite myself. He asked me to meet him for coffee. I almost declined. Instead, I went. David listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Do you want the company back?" I thought about it. "I don't know." "That's not what I asked." "Then yes, part of me does." "Why?" "Because it's mine." He shook his head. "That's not enough." "Why not?" "Because if you want it back just because your sister took it, you're still letting her decide what your life is about." I didn't like hearing that. He knew I didn't. "So what should I do?" I asked. "Build something else." I laughed. "That's your advice?" "Yes." "After 11 years?" "Yes." "After 11 years?" "Especially after 11 years." He leaned forward. "You built North Star because you saw a problem nobody else cared enough to solve. Is that still true?" I thought about it. It was. Then solve another problem. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation was the beginning of the second half of my life. I started small. I didn't announce a new company. I didn't create a website. I didn't post some dramatic LinkedIn message about resilience. I simply began talking to people I trusted. Former clients, former vendors, operations managers I had met over the years. I asked questions. What was frustrating them? What had changed in the industry? Where were companies losing money? I learned something uncomfortable. I had spent 11 years thinking I was building North Star. In reality, I had built a set of skills that didn't belong to North Star at all. I knew how to identify operational bottlenecks. I knew how to create escalation systems. I knew how to design vendor relationships. I knew how to build processes that ordinary employees could actually follow. Those skills had value independent of the company my sister now controlled. I started consulting informally. My first client was a regional manufacturer called Bellwether Controls. They had no relationship with North Star. David introduced me to their COO. The man told me, "We don't need another logistics company." I said, "I'm not selling logistics." "Then what are you selling?" "I'm selling fewer emergencies." He smiled. "Everybody sells that." "Then don't hire me." He laughed. We spent 90 minutes talking. 2 weeks later, he hired me for a small 3-month project. The fee was less than 1/10 of what I had earned from North Star. I accepted anyway. I worked from my apartment. I used an old desk. I built a process map for Bellwether's inbound materials. At the end of 3 months, their emergency freight expenses had dropped enough that they renewed me for another 6 months. Then they introduced me to another manufacturer. Then another. I wasn't rich. I wasn't even comfortable, but I was working again, and for the first time in years, nobody was telling me I should be grateful to be allowed inside my own company. Meanwhile, North Star started showing small signs of trouble. I heard about them indirectly. I wasn't monitoring the company obsessively because I knew that would destroy me, but information found its way to me. A dispatcher called one night and said, We're having trouble with the Tuesday exceptions. I said, "What kind?" He stopped. "Sorry, I shouldn't be calling you. You don't have to apologize. Lauren wants us to change the routing rules." "Why?" "She says they're inefficient." I asked what she wanted to change them to. He explained. I immediately knew the change would create a conflict between two carrier windows. I said, "Talk to Marcus." Marcus tried. "Then let Marcus handle it." "He can't." "Why?" Silence. Then he said, "Because Marcus resigned." That surprised me. Marcus had been one of the people I trusted most. When? Last Friday. Why? He didn't agree with the new structure. I thanked him and ended the call. I didn't celebrate. That mattered to me. These were people I had hired. Their jobs were connected to decisions made by people who had taken over something I built. If the company failed, employees would suffer. I didn't want that. I wanted the truth. There is a difference. At least there should be. I called Marcus the next day. He answered immediately. "You okay?" I asked. "No," he said. "You?" "Okay," said. "You?" "Not really." We talked for an hour. He told me Lauren had reorganized operations and removed several escalation procedures because she considered them too founder-dependent. She said the whole point of removing you was to make the company less dependent on one person, Marcus said. That's reasonable. It wouldn't be if she understood what those procedures did. I asked him whether he thought the company was in danger. He hesitated. Not immediately. What does that mean? They have enough good people to keep it running. For how long? Depends. On what? On how many of the wrong decisions they make. That became the pattern. North Star didn't collapse. That would have been too easy. Instead, it became slightly worse. A shipment was missed. A client complained. A vendor renegotiated terms. An employee quit. A customer asked why response times had increased. Each incident by itself was survivable. Together, they formed something I recognized instantly: operational drift. The company had been built around dozens of small controls. Remove one, nothing happens. Remove 10, nobody notices. Remove 20, and suddenly the organization feels inexplicably harder to manage. Lauren didn't know what she had removed because she hadn't created the system. She thought she was simplifying it. I had spent years learning which complications were unnecessary and which ones were load-bearing. She couldn't tell the difference. 6 months after my departure, Daniel Mercer called me. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he said, "Can we meet?" "Why?" "I'd rather discuss it in person." I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown. Daniel looked older than he had at the board meeting. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Better." "Good." Silence. "How is North Star?" I asked. He looked at silence. "How is North Star?" I asked. He looked at me. "You already know." "I know what people tell me." "Then you know enough." I waited. He finally said, "There are concerns." "What kind?" "Client retention, margin compression, leadership issues." "Leadership issues?" Lauren's been struggling. I almost smiled. She told everyone she was the reason the company succeeded. Daniel frowned. "I know. Do you believe that?" He didn't answer immediately. I believed she was a significant part of the growth story. "That's different." "I know that now." I looked at him. "Why are you here?" He leaned forward. "I want to understand the operational model." I almost laughed. "You had 11 years to understand it. I mean the underlying model. Chain map." "Yes." "You has Hepshane Tamp. You removed the person who built it. You were never removed because we believed the system couldn't operate without you." "Then why am I sitting here?" He looked down. "Because we were wrong." That was the first time anyone from the board admitted it. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. "What do you want from me?" "Consulting." "No." He blinked. "You didn't even hear the terms." I heard enough. "Why?" "Because you want me to fix the thing you took from me. We want you to help stabilize it. You don't get to fire me and then hire me back when the consequences show up." He nodded slowly. "Fair." Then he said something unexpected. "I understand." We ended the meeting without a deal. I drove home feeling strangely lighter. I had spent months wondering whether I wanted North Star back. That conversation answered the question. I didn't. I wanted my work recognized. Those were not the same thing. A few weeks later, something more serious happened. Bellwether Controls, my consulting client, asked me to help with a supplier coordination problem involving a company that happened to be one of Northstar's customers. I declined the portion that could create a conflict. I was very careful about that. I wasn't going to build my new business by poaching clients or exploiting confidential information. I hired an attorney to review my contracts and separation documents. Her name was Rachel Kim. She was direct, expensive, and completely unimpressed by family drama. I gave her the documents. She read them. Then she asked, "What exactly do you want?" I said, "I want to know what I legally own." "That's not the same as what you emotionally believe you own." "I know." "Good." She reviewed the separation agreement, incorporation records, intellectual property filings, and my employment documents. "The company owns the operational IP you formally assigned to it," she said. "But there are some things here that are more complicated." "Like what?" "Certain materials were created before the company existed. Certain methodologies were documented outside the company's formal IP schedule. Some of your personal consulting materials were never assigned." I stared at her. "Does that mean I can take Chainmap?" "No. Not necessarily." "Then what does it mean?" "It means you need to stop thinking in terms of revenge and start thinking in terms of ownership." That sentence changed the way I approached everything. I wasn't going to sabotage Northstar. I wasn't going to steal anything. I wasn't going to use information I wasn't entitled to use. But I was going to understand exactly what belonged to whom. Rachel asked me to create a timeline. Not a story. A timeline. When did I create the first chain map framework? When did it become company property? Which versions were formally assigned? Which documents were created by employees? Which were created by me personally? Which were created by me personally? Which client relationships were contractual with Northstar? Which were personal contacts? Which communications demonstrated Lauren's role? Which statements contradicted the documented history? I spent 3 weeks building that timeline. It was tedious. It was also strangely clarifying. I found things I had forgotten. An email from 2017 where I sent the first formal chain map draft to myself before Northstar had a dedicated operations server. A dated proposal from 2018 explaining the framework to a client. A board presentation from 2019 where I had personally demonstrated the system. A training document from 2020 with my name as author. A 2021 investor presentation describing me as the creator of the operational architecture. And then, beginning in 2023, a gradual change in language. The document started referring to Lauren as the architect. That pattern mattered. Rachel agreed. "This doesn't prove fraud by itself," she said. "But it establishes a factual history." "What about her investor statements?" "Depends what she said." I showed her the presentations. She frowned. "These are problematic." "How problematic?" "Potentially very. Because she claimed she built it, because she made representations about her role while participating in decisions that affected valuation and governance." I sat quietly. Rachel continued. "But don't accuse her of fraud unless we have evidence that meets the legal standard. I'm not trying to destroy her." Rachel looked at me. "You called me after your sister took your company." "I know." "Then you're trying to do something." I nodded. "I want the truth documented." She closed the folder. "That's something I can help you with." The midpoint of this whole mess came 3 months later, and it happened because of an email I almost deleted. It came from a former Northstar employee named Jenna Alvarez. Jenna had worked in finance and had resigned shortly after I left. She wrote only 6 words in the subject line. "I think you should see this." The attachment was an old internal presentation. I opened it expecting nothing. It was a strategic planning deck from 6 months before Lauren officially joined Northstar. My name was on every operational slide. That wasn't the important part. The important part was the final slide. It was a handwritten scan of a whiteboard from a leadership meeting. At the bottom, someone had written, "If we ever want outside capital, Lauren could eventually lead investor relations, but she cannot own operations without understanding Chainmap." I recognized the handwriting. It was our CFO's. Jenna's message contained another sentence. There were several conversations after this that I don't have records of. I called her. "Where did you get this?" "It was in the old finance archive." "Why are you sending it to me now?" She was silent. "Jenna, Because I was there. For what? The meetings. Which meetings? The ones where Lauren started talking about replacing you. My stomach tightened. When? Months before the board meeting. I sat down. How long had she been planning it? I don't know. What do you know? Jenna took a breath. She told me she had been told by someone on the board that if she could demonstrate that investors trusted her more than they trusted you, the board would consider changing the leadership structure. Who told her? I don't know. Did she say? She said it was Daniel. I stared at the wall. Are you sure? I'm sure that's what she said. I didn't know whether to believe it. Rachel told me not to assume. We needed evidence. Jenna had some. She had meeting notes. Not recordings. Not secret surveillance. Just notes she had made as part of her job. She had preserved them because she was worried about what was happening. One note mentioned a phrase that immediately caught my attention: founder dependency. Another said, Lauren believes company can be reframed as post-founder growth story. A third said, need board confidence before transition. I read those lines 3 times. Suddenly, the earlier conversations made sense. You need to delegate comments. The people are worried about your leadership comments. The presentations describing Lauren as the person who transformed the company. The requests for more investor access. It wasn't a sudden takeover, it was a campaign. And the worst part was that I had helped it succeed by refusing to confront her when the evidence was still small. I asked Jenna one final question. Why didn't you tell me? She started crying because I was scared. Of Lauren? Of losing my job. You left. You left. After you left. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. I should have seen it. You couldn't have. I should have. She shook her head. You trusted your family. That sentence hurt because it was true. The revelation changed my strategy completely. Until then, I had been documenting ownership because I wanted to understand what belonged to me. After Jenna's disclosure, I started documenting the narrative itself, not to manufacture a case, but to preserve the factual history before more records disappeared or memories changed. I contacted former employees only when they reached out first. I didn't pressure anyone. I asked whether they were willing to preserve documents they already possessed lawfully. Rachel advised me on what I could request and what I shouldn't touch. I didn't want a revenge story built on illegal behavior. I wanted something much more devastating. The truth, organized so thoroughly that nobody could dismiss it as bitterness. Meanwhile, Lauren became increasingly aggressive publicly. She gave an interview to a regional business publication about North Star's growth. I read it twice. She said she had joined a founder-led operation that had reached its ceiling and rebuilt the company around scalable systems. She said the original business was highly dependent on individual relationships. She said she had professionalized the organization. She didn't mention my name once. The article included a photograph of her standing beside the North Star logo. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the browser. My new company, which I eventually called Meridian Operations Group, had begun to grow, slowly. Bellwether became a long-term client. 2 other manufacturers signed consulting agreements. I hired one analyst, then another. We worked out of a small office above a dental practice. It wasn't glamorous. The elevator smelled like disinfectant. The parking lot flooded when it rained. The first time my employee asked me where we kept the emergency coffee, I realized I had become a boss again. That felt strange. Good strange. I started sleeping better. I stopped checking North Star news. I started rebuilding friendships I'd neglected. I visited my parents less, not because I hated them, but because every conversation eventually turned into Lauren. My mother still defended her. My father mostly stayed silent. One Sunday, I finally told him I wouldn't discuss North Star anymore. My father said, "That's your choice." My mother cried, "You're abandoning your family." I said, "No, I'm setting a boundary." She asked whether I would forgive Lauren. I said, "Maybe someday. She misses you." Then she can call. She doesn't know what to say. Neither do I. That was the end of the conversation. A month later, Daniel called again. This time he sounded less controlled. "We have a serious problem." I asked, "What kind?" "One of our largest clients is threatening to leave." "Which one?" He named the client. I knew them. I had personally negotiated their original agreement. "Why?" They don't trust the new process. What process? The one Lauren introduced. I almost laughed. The one she said she designed? Please. I stopped. Daniel rarely sounded desperate. What do you want? I want you to meet with us. No. Just hear us out. No. Just hear us out. No. You're making a mistake. I already made my mistake. I trusted people who told me I wasn't necessary. Silence. Then Daniel said, "You don't understand how bad this could get." I replied, "I understand exactly how bad it could get." And for the first time, I meant something different by it. I wasn't threatening him. I wasn't threatening. I simply understood the system. I understood the company. I understood what would happen if the wrong decisions continued. But I also understood something Lauren had never learned. The person who understands how a system works doesn't need to destroy it to prove that he built it. He only needs to stop pretending that someone else understands it better. 2 weeks later, Northstar lost the client. The board called an emergency meeting. Lauren blamed the operations team. The operations team blamed the new routing structure. The CFO blamed declining margins. Daniel blamed market conditions. Nobody blamed the person who had changed the system because doing so would have required admitting that the leadership transition itself might have been a mistake. Then Lauren made her biggest mistake. She sent an internal memo to employees saying the company was experiencing temporary resistance to necessary modernization and that certain former leadership influences were attempting to undermine confidence in the new direction. I wasn't named. I didn't need to be. Everyone knew who she meant. A former employee forwarded the memo to me. I sent it to Rachel. She read it and said, "Don't respond." I wasn't going to. Good. What happens now? She looked at me over the top of her glasses. Now you let her keep talking. I understood exactly what she meant. The more Lauren explained her version of history, the more opportunity she created for that history to contradict itself. So I did nothing. I kept building Meridian. I kept documenting. I kept my distance. And while Lauren fought to prove that Northstar had succeeded because of her, the company she claimed to have transformed was beginning to ask the one question she could not answer. If she had built the system, why did she need everyone who had worked under me to explain how it functioned? The answer was becoming obvious to more people every week. But the most important person had not admitted it yet. Daniel Mercer still believed he could save the company without admitting what the board had done. That would change when the next major contract came up for renewal. Because this time the client didn't want Lauren in the room. They wanted the person whose name appeared on the original operational agreement, the person who had built the process they had trusted for years, and the person who had spent the last 12 months quietly building a life that no longer depended on whether anyone at Northstar believed his story. And when Daniel called me again and said, "They'll only sign if you attend," I finally understood that the door Lauren had slammed in my face months earlier was about to open from the other side. The door Lauren had slammed in my face months earlier was about to open from the other side. But I didn't walk through it immediately. When Daniel told me the client would only sign the renewal if I attended the meeting, my first reaction was a very simple one. No. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "They're willing to terminate the contract if you're not there." That's not my problem. I know. Then why are you calling me? Because I think you know what happens next. I did know. If the client walked, 2 other clients would probably start asking questions, not because they were loyal to me personally, but because they had trusted the operating model I had built. Northstar's reputation had always been based on consistency. Once customers began questioning whether that consistency still existed, every sales presentation Lauren had given about modernization would become harder to defend. Still, I didn't want to be the guy who came running back the moment the company needed him. What exactly do they want? I asked. They want you to review the transition plan. And Lauren? She'll be there. Of course she will. Daniel sighed. Please. I could hear how tired he sounded. I'm not asking you to come back. Good. I'm asking you to sit in one meeting. Why me? Because they trust you. That isn't the answer you wanted to give. He didn't respond. I said, what happened to the idea that I was too difficult to scale? We were wrong. I had heard those words before, but this time they carried more weight because he wasn't speaking privately anymore. The board was beginning to realize the consequences of the story they had accepted. I agreed to attend on one condition. I will not discuss returning to Northstar. I won't take operational responsibility. I won't accept a consulting role unless my attorney reviews everything first. Agreed, and I won't lie for you. Daniel hesitated. What do you mean? If someone asks who built the system, I'm not going to pretend Lauren did. Silence. Then he said, fair enough. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the offices of the client, a manufacturer called Keystone Industrial Systems. Keystone had been with Northstar for almost 6 years. Their operations director, Paul Benton, had trusted me from the beginning because he understood something most investors didn't. Logistics wasn't about having the best presentation. It was about what happened at 4:17 on a Friday afternoon when a critical supplier called and said the shipment wasn't coming. I arrived early. Lauren was already there with Daniel. She looked at me through the glass conference room and gave me a small smile. You came. You asked me to. Daniel asked you. That's right. She nodded. I'm glad. I didn't answer. Paul walked in a minute later. He shook my hand and held it longer than necessary. Good to see you. You too. He looked at Lauren. Then Daniel. Then me. Let's get started. The first 20 minutes were surprisingly civil. Lauren presented the new service model. She explained how Northstar had improved efficiency by standardizing exception handling. Paul listened. Then he asked, what happens when the supplier misses the confirmation deadline? Lauren answered immediately, the exception is escalated through the regional coordinator. Paul frowned. Which regional coordinator? The one assigned to the account. No, I mean who owns the escalation? She paused. The regional coordinator. Paul looked at me. I said nothing. He looked back at Lauren. What if that person is unavailable? Then it goes to the operations manager. Which operations manager? Lauren glanced at Daniel. We have several. Paul leaned back. That's the problem. Lauren's expression changed. What problem? I don't know who owns the exception anymore. The room went quiet. I finally spoke. That's because the current process removed the exception ownership layer. Lauren looked at me sharply. We removed unnecessary founder dependency. Paul looked between us. What does that mean? I said, it means the system used to assign one accountable person, regardless of which department touched the problem. That layer was removed during the restructuring. Lauren said, because it wasn't scalable. It was scalable. It depended on you. The framework didn't depend on me. The framework didn't depend on me. The framework depended on the person assigned to the account. Then why did you personally handle so many exceptions? Because when the company was smaller, I was the assigned person. Paul rubbed his forehead. Can you two not do this? I looked at him. I'm not trying to. Lauren folded her arms. Neither am I. Paul opened the file in front of him. Then explain this. He pulled out an old Northstar operating manual. My name was on the first page. This is the process we've been using for years. He turned to another page. Your new version doesn't have this section. He looked at Lauren. Why? She said. Because we're modernizing. Paul shook his head. No, you're removing the part that keeps us from losing money. Daniel stared at the table. I could feel the entire room shifting. Not toward me. Not yet. Just away from the certainty Lauren had enjoyed for the past year. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even look at her. I simply explained what the old process did, why it existed, and what would happen if it remained removed. Paul listened. At the end of the meeting, he said, we'll renew if the original escalation architecture is restored. Lauren objected. That isn't necessary. Paul looked at her. Then we won't renew. Daniel stepped in. We'll review the requirement. Paul stood. You have 10 business days. As we walked out, Lauren followed me into the hallway. You enjoyed that. I stopped. No. You made me look incompetent. I explained a system. You could have helped me. I looked at her. I did. When? For 3 years. Her face hardened. You still think this is about credit? No. Then what is it about? I took a breath. It's about you taking responsibility for something you never learned. She stared at me. You think you understand everything because you built it? No. I think I understand what I built because I spent 11 years learning where it breaks. She walked away. I expected that to feel satisfying. It didn't. It felt sad, because somewhere underneath everything she had done was the sister I remembered before the company became a battlefield. That night I called Rachel and told her what happened. She said, good. That's all? What did you want me to say? I don't know. Don't get emotionally involved in their operational problems. I'm not. You are. I didn't answer. She continued, you need to decide whether you're building Meridian or trying to prove North Star needed you. I looked at the Meridian office across the room. I'm building Meridian. Then act like it. I did. I stopped attending North Star meetings unless there was a specific contractual reason. I refused every informal request. I told former employees I couldn't advise them. I wouldn't answer operational questions. If someone sent me a North Star document accidentally, I deleted it without reading it and told them to resend it through the proper channels. I wanted my hands clean. I also wanted my revenge clean. If there was going to be a reckoning, it would come from evidence, not sabotage. Meanwhile, Lauren started fighting back. The first sign was a letter from North Star's attorney accusing me of interfering with client relationships. Rachel forwarded it to me with a single sentence. Don't respond emotionally. I didn't. She drafted a response documenting that I had declined operational involvement and had only attended the Keystone meeting at the board's request. We sent it. 2 weeks later, the accusation disappeared. But Lauren had learned something. She couldn't simply blame me without creating records that could be challenged, so she changed tactics. She started saying I was bitter, that I was trying to undermine North Star because I couldn't accept losing control, that I was contacting former employees to build a competing company. Some of it was true in the most technical sense. I was building Meridian, but I wasn't recruiting North Star employees or clients. I wasn't using confidential information. I wasn't trying to take anything. I was simply existing outside the company she controlled. That seemed to bother her more than I expected. A former employee named Greg called me one evening. You need to know something. What? Lauren told the board you were planning to poach Keystone. I'm not. I know. Why would she say that? Because they lost another client. I sat down. Which one? He told me. It was one of the accounts I had personally stabilized after a major service failure 3 years earlier. I knew exactly why it was leaving. The new account management structure had split responsibilities that used to sit with one person. The client had spent months complaining about having to explain the same problem to 3 different people. I said, did anyone ask why? They blamed the market. Of course they did. Greg sighed. There's more. What? They've started reviewing old client agreements. Why? Someone thinks there are inconsistencies in how the company documented renewal rights. That caught my attention. What kind of inconsistencies? I don't know. Then don't speculate. I'm telling you what I heard. I thanked him and ended the call. The next morning, Rachel called me. We have a problem. What happened? I received a letter from North Star. About? They claim some of the operational materials you created before the company incorporated are company property. I frowned. They are? That's what we're going to determine. Why now? Because they're looking at your consulting business. Do they think I'm using their IP? Apparently. I was angry, but I didn't show it. Am I? Not from what you've given me. Then what do? We prove what you're using. She had me document every process Meridian used. We separated general professional knowledge from North Star specific materials. We created new templates. We rewrote our methodology in our own language. I voluntarily avoided anything that could reasonably be characterized as North Star confidential information. It cost time and money. I didn't care. I wanted to be able to stand in court if necessary and say, everything here is mine, and I can prove where it came from. That process unexpectedly strengthened Meridian. We created better tools than I had used at North Star because I was finally designing them for a company that wasn't dependent on old habits. By the end of the year, Meridian had 12 employees and 7 clients. Still small but profitable. One afternoon, my analyst, Priya, came into my office holding a printout. You know we're bigger than North Star was in its 3rd year, right? I laughed. Don't compare us. Why? Because I don't want to become obsessed with them. She smiled. Fair. Then she asked, why don't you ever talk about what happened? I looked at her. I do. No, you talk about the facts. You never talk about how it felt. I leaned back. Because I'm still figuring that out. She nodded. That's probably fair too. That conversation made me realize something. I had been so focused on documenting the business betrayal that I hadn't documented what it had done to me. I stopped trusting people. I checked every contract twice. I avoided giving anyone too much authority. I interpreted harmless disagreements as warning signs. Rachel noticed it too. "You're building the same problem in reverse," she told me. "What do you mean?" "You're afraid of another Lauren, so you're trying to become the only person who knows everything." I hated how accurate that was. "What should I do?" "Teach people." "I do." "No, you explain. That's different." She made me build documentation that other people could actually use. I hired managers and gave them authority. I created ownership matrices. I made decisions transparent. It was uncomfortable. But slowly, Meridian became less dependent on me. That was important because I never wanted another company to become an extension of my identity. While I was learning that lesson, North Star was learning the opposite one. Lauren kept centralizing decisions around herself. She wanted to approve major client communications. She wanted to review investor updates. She wanted to control strategic presentations. She became the person every department had to go through, exactly the way she had accused me of being. The difference was that I had built systems to distribute responsibility. She had built a system around herself. Eventually, the board noticed. Daniel called me again. "We need to talk." "About what?" "Lauren." "That's not my problem." "Maybe not. Then what is this?" "She's been representing certain things about the company's history that aren't accurate." I said nothing. "Are you aware of that?" "Yes." "How?" "Documents." "What documents?" "What documents?" "Mine." He paused. "Would you be willing to provide them?" "To whom?" "The board." "Why?" "Because we're conducting a governance review." I immediately said, "No." "Why?" "Because I don't want to become the source of a private war." "This isn't private anymore." "It became public when she started telling investors she built the company." He exhaled. "You have evidence?" "Yes." "How much?" "Enough." "What would you do if you were me?" I thought about it. I'd ask why the person who claimed to have built the operational architecture can't explain the architecture. Daniel was quiet. "That's what we've been asking." "Then you don't need me." "We need documentation." I agreed to provide a limited package through Rachel. Not everything. Only documents directly relevant to specific representations Lauren had made. Rachel prepared the package carefully. It included dated chain map development records, early client proposals, board materials predating Lauren's employment, intellectual property records, and correspondence establishing who created the original methodology. There was no editorializing, no accusations, just documents. Daniel received them. 2 days later, he called. "This changes things." "How?" "A lot of the dates don't match what we've been told." That's what dates are for. There are presentations where Lauren described herself as the architect of systems that existed before she joined. "Yes. Why didn't you tell us?" I almost laughed. "I did. Not formally. I was trying to preserve my family." "And how did that work?" I closed my eyes. It didn't. The governance review expanded. Lauren immediately found out. She accused me of orchestrating it. She told the family I was trying to destroy her. My mother called me crying. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything." "Lauren says you've given the board documents to get her fired." "I gave them documents they requested." "You could have refused." "I could have lied too." She said nothing. "Mom, what do you want me to do? Pretend I didn't build the company?" "I want peace." "So do I." "Then stop." "Stop what?" "Stop what?" "Fighting." I looked at the phone. "I'm not fighting." "Then why does it feel like you're fighting?" "Because the truth is finally catching up with the story." She hung up. I sat there for a long time. That was the first time I understood that my family didn't necessarily want the truth. They wanted the conflict to end, even if ending the conflict required me to surrender the truth. A week later, my father came to my office. He looked exhausted. He sat across from me and said, "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond. "I thought Lauren was trying to help you." "I know." I believed her. "I know. I should have listened to you." I looked at him. "Why didn't you?" He swallowed. "Because I thought you were too close to the company to see what was happening." I almost smiled. "And you thought she wasn't?" "I thought she was different." "She is." He nodded. Yes. He nodded with, yes. I didn't forgive him immediately. I didn't yell either. I simply told him, I don't know what happens between us now. He said, I understand. That was more honest than most conversations we'd had in years. The governance review uncovered something bigger than credit theft. Lauren had represented to investors that she had designed a specific expansion strategy that had actually been developed by me and our former CFO 2 years before she joined. That mattered because the expansion strategy had been part of the justification for the second investment round. It wasn't just vanity anymore. It touched valuation. Rachel reviewed the documents. This is serious, she said. What happens now? That's for the board and their counsel. Can she be sued? Potentially. But don't think about that. Why? Because your goal should be factual correction, not punishment. I nodded. That was difficult. I wanted punishment. I wanted Lauren to feel the same humiliation I had felt sitting in that conference room. But I also knew that if I made revenge the goal, I could become reckless. So I focused on the evidence. Then came the setback. The board's outside counsel sent a letter saying they have reviewed the materials and found that certain historical documents may reflect differing interpretations of executive contributions. In other words, they weren't ready to admit anything. Lauren had convinced enough people that the truth could still be framed as a disagreement over credit. Worse, Daniel stopped responding to me. I learned later that Lauren had convinced 2 board members that I was selectively presenting documents to create a false narrative. She also accused Jenna of being a disgruntled former employee. The evidence hadn't failed. The people interpreting it had. For several weeks, nothing happened. Viridian was growing, but I was distracted. I kept thinking about North Star. I hated that. I had promised myself I wouldn't become obsessed with the company again. Yet every time my phone buzzed, I wondered whether it was another update. Rachel noticed. You're slipping. I know. Then stop. How? Remember what you told me. What? You don't need North Star. I looked at her. I know. Then let them drown in their own paperwork. I laughed. That's a terrible metaphor. It's a terrible situation. She was right. I stepped back. I focused on Meridian. We signed a major client. I hired a controller. We moved into a larger office. I started taking weekends off. My life began to feel normal again. Then on a Monday morning, I received a letter from the board's attorney. It was short. They wanted me to attend a formal governance hearing as a witness regarding the development history of North Star's operational systems and the representations made to investors. Rachel read it before I did. She looked at me and said, "This is the moment." "What moment?" "The one you've been waiting for." I wasn't waiting. Maybe not consciously. She handed me the letter. They're finally going to ask the question in a room where nobody can pretend they didn't hear the answer. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I prepared carefully. I reviewed every document. I created a chronological binder. I made sure I could distinguish what I personally knew from what others had told me. I wrote down questions I expected. I didn't rehearse speeches. I didn't want to sound polished. I wanted to be accurate. The day before the hearing, Lauren called me directly for the first time in almost a year. I almost didn't answer. I did. "Hello." She was silent. Then she said, "You don't have to do this." I said, "Do what? Destroy me." "I'm not destroying you." "You know what happens if you testify." "I know what happens if I lie." She breathed out slowly. "You think you're innocent in all this?" I didn't answer. "You think you didn't make mistakes?" she asked. "I made plenty." "You shut people out." "Yes." "You didn't delegate." "Yes." "You didn't delegate." "Yes." "You built a company that depended too much on you." "Yes." "Then why are you acting like I'm the only reason things went wrong?" "I'm not." "You always do this." "Do what?" "Make everything about facts so you don't have to admit you're hurt." That one landed. I was quiet. She said, "I wanted you to see me." I closed my eyes. "I saw you." "No, you didn't." "Lauren, I saw you. I just didn't expect you to want what I had. I wanted what I helped build." "That's the part we disagree about." Silence. Then she said, "If you testify tomorrow, we're done." I said, "I think we're already there." She hung up. The next morning, I walked into the hearing room with Rachel beside me. Daniel was there. The board was there. The CFO was there. Lauren was sitting at the far end of the table. She looked different, less confident, more tired. But when she saw me, she straightened. The attorney asked me to confirm my name, age, and former role. Then she asked the question that changed everything. When was North Star's core operational architecture first developed? I answered. Approximately 6 months before the company incorporated. Lauren shifted in her chair. The attorney asked, "Who developed it?" I said, "I did." Did Lauren participate in its original development? No. When did she join North Star? I gave the date. And when did she first become involved with the operational architecture? After the company had already been using it for years. The attorney placed a document on the table. Is this your original framework? Yes. Is your name on it? Yes. Date? Before Lauren joined. She placed another document beside it. This investor presentation identifies Lauren as the architect. Is that accurate? I looked at the presentation. No. Why not? Because the architecture described there existed before she joined the company. Did she modify it? She participated in some later changes. Did she create it? No. Did you ever tell investors she created it? No. Then Lauren's attorney objected to the characterization. The room went quiet. The hearing continued for hours. I answered every question. I admitted my mistakes. I admitted that I had allowed Lauren too much access. I admitted that I had failed to formalize certain responsibilities early enough. I admitted that I had trusted family more than governance. I didn't portray myself as perfect. That mattered, because when they asked about the board meeting where I was removed, I said, I believe the board made a decision based on information that was incomplete and, in some cases, inaccurate. Not Lauren lied. Not they betrayed me. Just the facts. By the end of the hearing, even people who had once believed Lauren's version were asking different questions. But the most important question hadn't been asked yet. It would come from the person who had originally believed Lauren's story more than anyone else. Daniel waited until the room had emptied before looking at her. You said you built the system, he said. Lauren stared at him. I helped build the company. That's not what I asked? She didn't answer. Daniel pushed the old chain map manual across the table. Then explain it. Lauren looked at the document. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not confidence, not resentment. Fear. She turned the first page, then the second. She couldn't explain the logic behind the exception hierarchy. She couldn't explain why certain vendor dependencies were weighted differently. She couldn't explain why a particular client had a custom escalation branch. She couldn't explain why one section had been intentionally designed to look inefficient on paper. She knew the language, she knew the presentation, she knew the story. But she didn't know the system. Daniel looked at me. I didn't say anything. He looked back at Lauren. How did you build something you can't explain? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. And in that silence, the entire story she had spent years constructing finally began to collapse under the weight of the one thing she had never bothered to learn, what the work actually was. What the work actually was. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Daniel asked that question. I remember the air conditioner humming above us and the faint sound of someone moving a chair in the hallway outside the conference room. Lauren was still holding the chain map manual. Her thumb was pressed against the edge of the first page so hard that her knuckle had gone white. Daniel looked at her, then at the document, then back at her. You said you designed this, he said. Lauren swallowed. I said I helped develop the company's operating model. That's not what the investor presentation says. The presentation was simplified. It says you designed the architecture. I was responsible for its modernization. That's not what I asked. She looked toward her attorney. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered something. I couldn't hear it. Lauren closed the manual. I didn't do this alone. Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. Nobody is asking whether you worked alone. We're asking whether you represented yourself as the creator of something you did not create. Lauren looked at me. For a second, I thought she might finally say it. I thought she might admit that she'd exaggerated, that she'd gotten carried away, that she'd believed she deserved more recognition than she had received. Instead, she said, he made it impossible for anyone else to get credit. I felt my jaw tighten. Daniel stared at her. That's not an answer. It's the truth. No, he said. It's a different argument. The hearing resumed the following morning. I didn't attend every session. Rachel told me I shouldn't. You don't need to watch your sister's career collapse in real time, she said. You need to make sure your own career doesn't become collateral damage. She was right. Meridian had grown enough that my absence was noticeable, and I had finally learned the lesson I should have learned at 25. A business can't depend on one person, even when that person is you. I delegated the day-to-day work to Priya and our operations director, Mark. I attended only the meetings that genuinely required me. It felt strange at first. Then it felt healthy. Meanwhile, the governance review continued without me. The board examined investor presentations, internal communications, employee reports, and old planning documents. They interviewed former employees. They reviewed the timeline Rachel had submitted. They compared Lauren's public statements with documents created years before she joined the company. They also started looking at something I hadn't initially considered: whether Lauren had made financial decisions based on assumptions about her own authority that weren't actually supported by the company's governance documents. That investigation was where things became much more serious. Lauren had negotiated several executive agreements and vendor contracts under the assumption that she had authority to restructure certain operational arrangements without board approval. Some of those decisions were legitimate, some were not. The problem wasn't that she had intentionally broken the law. The problem was that she had been operating from a belief about her position that the documents didn't support. In one case, she had changed a major vendor's service terms without realizing that the original agreement required board review for a modification of that scope. In another, she had represented to an investor that a certain operational asset was controlled by the executive team when the actual agreement gave the board authority over it. None of those things alone would have ended her career. Together, they demonstrated something the board had ignored when it promoted her. She had been speaking with the authority of someone who understood the company's structure without actually understanding how that structure had been built. The most damaging evidence came from a former employee named Jenna. She had kept copies of meeting notes from the period before my removal. Those notes showed that Lauren had discussed becoming the public face of North Star months before the board ever raised concerns about my leadership. One note said, Lauren believes investors need a different story about founder dependence. Another said, transition should happen before next funding round. A third was more direct, need founder out before market narrative hardens. That third line made me sick when I read it, not because it was surprising anymore, but because I remembered exactly what I had been doing during the period when those conversations were happening. I had been working on a warehouse transition. I had been negotiating a carrier agreement. I had been helping a client solve a production delay. I had been sitting in my office at 11 at night reviewing a process Lauren was already planning to use against me. I had been building the company while someone else was building a case for removing me from it. Rachel told me not to react publicly. Don't post anything, she said. Don't contact the press. Don't tell former employees to talk. Don't give interviews. I'm not going to. Good. Let the documents speak. That became the hardest part of the entire revenge. I had always imagined revenge as action. In reality, mine was mostly restraint. Every time somebody sent me an angry message about Lauren, I wanted to respond. Every time a former employee told me something outrageous, I wanted to confront her. Every time my mother called and repeated something Lauren had said, I wanted to defend myself. I didn't. I kept records. I answered questions through counsel when necessary. I built Meridian. I went to dinner with friends. I learned how to be a person again. That last part was harder than it sounds. For years, I had measured my value by the company's performance. If revenue was up, I felt good. If a client renewed, I felt useful. If a problem was solved, I felt competent. When North Star disappeared from my daily life, all of those measurements disappeared too. I had to figure out what remained when nobody was calling me founder. The answer turned out to be more than I expected. I was still the guy who could sit across from an operations manager and understand what they were actually saying. I was still the guy who could look at a broken process and find the hidden bottleneck. I was still capable of hiring people, trusting them, learning from mistakes, and building something from nothing. The company had been important to me. It had never been the entirety of me. I just hadn't known that until I lost it. Meridian grew slowly through that period. We didn't have venture capital. We didn't have a flashy office. We didn't call ourselves disruptive. We sold practical results. One of our clients had been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on emergency transportation because their suppliers frequently missed delivery windows. We redesigned their escalation process. Another client had 3 departments handling the same vendor issue independently. We created a single ownership model. A third had no standardized process for dealing with inventory discrepancies. We built one. None of this was revolutionary. It was simply useful. And because I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore, I found myself making better decisions. I didn't need every client. I didn't chase every opportunity. I didn't say yes because I was afraid someone might leave. I learned to say no. That was probably the most important thing I gained from losing North Star. At 32, I had finally learned that boundaries weren't the opposite of loyalty. They were part of it. While I was learning that, North Star's problems became impossible to hide. The company wasn't collapsing overnight. That would have made the story too clean. Instead, revenue remained respectable while margins deteriorated. Client complaints increased. Employee turnover rose. The board began receiving increasingly detailed reports about service failures. The company had always survived small mistakes because the system caught them. Now the system was being modified by people who didn't understand why certain controls existed. A manager would fix one problem and accidentally create another. A client would ask for a change, Lauren would approve it, and another department would discover that the change conflicted with a different contract. Employees started creating their own workarounds. That was the beginning of real danger. Workarounds are what organizations invent when the official process stops making sense. Once enough workarounds exist, nobody knows what the real process is anymore. I recognized the pattern because I had spent 11 years learning to prevent it. North Star had gone from a controlled system to a collection of individual solutions. The board eventually brought in an outside operational consultant. I knew the consultant. His name was Robert Hale. He had been recommended by Daniel. Robert spent 6 weeks interviewing employees. Then he produced a report. I didn't see the full report until months later, but Rachel obtained the copy through a legitimate disclosure process during the governance dispute. The first sentence that mattered said, North Star's current operating model has materially diverged from the architecture under which the company achieved its historical reliability. The second said, the organization appears to have removed several exception management controls without establishing equivalent replacement mechanisms. The third was the one that made me sit back in my chair. Several employees interviewed independently described these controls as originating from the company's original founder. There was no revenge in that report, no accusation, no emotion, just a consultant describing what the organization had become. Lauren didn't accept it. According to the board minutes, she argued that the consultant was overly influenced by legacy employees. She said the company needed to break its psychological dependence on the founder. That phrase ended up in the minutes. So did the consultant's response. This is not a psychological dependency issue. It is a process ownership issue. That distinction mattered. Lauren had built her entire story around the idea that I represented the past, and she represented the future. The consultant was saying the future still required understanding the past. Then came the setback that nearly destroyed my confidence in the whole strategy. North Star's board voted to retain Lauren as CEO pending further review. Daniel told me personally, they're not ready to remove her. Why? They think the business can stabilize. Can it? Maybe. I was silent. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. You seem disappointed. I am. Because you want her gone. Because I want the truth to matter. Daniel didn't answer. I asked what happens if the board decides her mistakes are just mistakes. Then that's their decision. And the false claims? That's still under review. I hung up feeling more defeated than I expected. I had spent months believing that documentation would eventually force reality to win. But reality doesn't always win immediately. Sometimes people know the truth and choose convenience anyway. That was a lesson I hadn't learned yet. For several days I couldn't focus. Meridian was doing well. But I kept thinking about North Star. What if Lauren survived? What if she managed to rewrite everything? What if the board decided that the distinction between founder and executive contribution didn't matter? What if the documents were technically correct but emotionally irrelevant? Rachel found me staring at a spreadsheet one afternoon without entering anything. You're doing it again? I looked up. Doing what? Trying to control an outcome you don't control. I sighed. What if she gets away with it? Rachel sat down. Then she gets away with it. Rachel sat down. Then she gets away with it? I looked at her. That's your advice? No, that's reality. Then what's the point of all this? The point is that you tell the truth and protect your interests. You don't get to decide whether everyone else responds correctly. I thought about that for a long time. Then I closed the spreadsheet. You're right. She smiled. I know. I laughed. You're enjoying this. A little. I went back to work. 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Keystone Industrial Systems didn't just renew its contract. It asked Meridian to consult on a new distribution operation. Paul Benton told me, "We trust you because you tell us when something won't work." I asked, "Isn't that what everyone does?" He laughed. "No. Most consultants tell us what they think we want to hear." The contract was worth more than anything Meridian had signed before. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to allow us to hire additional staff and move into a proper office. I signed the agreement on a Friday afternoon. That evening, I drove home and realized I hadn't thought about North Star for almost an entire day. That felt like a victory. Not because my sister was losing, because I wasn't living inside the betrayal anymore. The next Monday, Daniel called. "You should sit down." "Why?" "The board has discovered something." I sat. "What?" "The second investment round." "What?" "The second investment round." "What about it?" "The representations about the growth strategy." My stomach tightened. What did they find? The strategy presentation Lauren gave to investors was based almost entirely on a planning document you and the CFO created before she joined. I know. No, there's more. He paused. The investor deck omitted your name from the authorship section and replaced it with Lauren's. I stared at the wall. Who changed it? We're still determining that. When? 2 weeks before the funding meeting. Who had access? Lauren, the CFO, the investor relations team. I didn't speak. There is also an email. From whom? Lauren. To whom? The investor relations manager. Daniel sounded uncomfortable. She wrote that the deck needed to reflect the company's post-founder leadership. I closed my eyes. That's not illegal. No. But it's evidence. Yes. What else? He hesitated. She said the board would be more comfortable if investors saw her as the architect of the growth model. I said nothing. There's another line. What? She said if they still think of the company as his, they won't believe I can lead it. That sentence stayed with me. It wasn't simply greed. It was insecurity. Lauren didn't just want my company. She wanted proof that she could be the person who deserved it. She had spent years competing with a version of me that existed mostly in her head, and because she believed my recognition made hers smaller, she had tried to erase me. The next board session was different. This time, I wasn't there as the accused founder. I was there as a witness whose documents had become central to the review. The board chair, Ellen Whitaker, was a woman I had barely interacted with during my time at North Star. She was methodical, quiet, and almost impossible to read. She began the meeting by saying, "We have reviewed substantial documentation regarding the historical development of the company's operating model and the representations made during the second investment round." She looked at Lauren. "There are inconsistencies." Lauren's attorney immediately objected to the phrasing. Ellen didn't argue. "Then we will call them discrepancies." The discussion lasted hours. The board examined the original strategy documents. They compared them with the investor presentation. They looked at the dates. They examined email chains. They questioned the CFO about why certain authorship information had changed. The CFO eventually admitted that Lauren had asked for the deck to be revised. "Did you know the underlying strategy had been developed by the founder?" Ellen asked. "Yes." "Why did you approve the revision?" He looked exhausted. "I thought it was a presentation issue." Ellen stared at him. "It wasn't." He nodded. "I understand that now." Lauren was asked directly whether she had instructed the investor relations team to present her as the architect. She said, "I asked them to position me as the executive responsible for growth." "That's not the question," Ellen said. "Did you instruct them to remove the founder's authorship attribution?" Lauren paused. "I don't remember." Jenna's notes were then introduced. The email was introduced. The original deck was introduced. Her answer became impossible to maintain. I may have. Ellen looked down at the documents. May have? Lauren's voice became quieter. I don't remember the exact conversation. I sat there watching her. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. This wasn't the victory I had imagined. It was paperwork exposing a person I had once shared a bedroom with as a child. It was my sister sitting across from a board of directors while attorneys dissected emails about something that should never have happened between family members. When the meeting ended, Lauren walked past me without looking up. I thought she would leave. Instead, she stopped beside the door. "Are you happy?" she asked. I said, "No." "You should be." "Why?" "Because you're finally getting what you wanted." I looked at her. What did I want? For everyone to admit you built everything. I wanted you to stop pretending you built it. She laughed bitterly. Same thing. No. She stared at me. What's the difference? The difference is that I never needed you to be small for me to be successful. She looked away. You always thought you were better than me. I thought we were different. You had the company. I had the work. Exactly. Her voice cracked slightly, and everyone saw it. What? They saw you as the one who mattered. Mom always said you were the practical one. Dad said you were the one who could build things. I was the outgoing one. The people person. The one who could talk. Do you know what it felt like watching everyone act like you had some special gift? Because you could make a spreadsheet and stay awake all night? I almost smiled sadly. You think that's why I stayed awake? I think you like being needed. That one hurt because it was partly true. Maybe I did, I said. But that doesn't make what you did okay. She nodded. I know. It was the first time she'd said it. I wasn't sure whether she meant the entire thing or just that conversation. Then she walked away. I didn't follow her. The board eventually suspended Lauren as CEO, pending the final governance findings. She wasn't arrested. There was no dramatic police scene, no handcuffs, no public spectacle. That's not how real business consequences usually work. Instead, she received legal notices, lost authority, lost access to certain decision-making processes, and became the subject of an internal investigation. Several investors demanded revised disclosures. 2 board members resigned because they believed they had failed to perform proper oversight. The CFO resigned. The head of client development resigned. Several employees left voluntarily because they were tired of the instability. Clients didn't all leave. Most stayed, at least initially, because switching providers is expensive and disruptive. But the company became cautious. Every major decision required additional review. Every representation to investors went through counsel. The same board that had once praised Lauren's decisiveness now required 3 approvals before she could change a vendor contract. The irony was almost too perfect. The woman who had claimed I was too controlling had helped create a company where nobody trusted anyone enough to make a decision without paperwork. But there was still one thing unresolved: ownership. The governance investigation could establish that Lauren had misrepresented her role. It could establish that the board had acted on incomplete information. It could establish that certain investment materials were inaccurate. But it didn't automatically give me North Star back. I had signed a separation agreement. I still owned a minority stake, but I had no operational control. I didn't want operational control anyway. Rachel made that clear. You need to decide what outcome you actually want. I want them to acknowledge what happened. Anything else? I thought, I want my ownership interest valued fairly. Good. And I want the company to stop using my name and history to support a narrative that isn't true. That's achievable. What about Lauren? Rachel looked at me. What about her? I don't want her destroyed. Then don't ask for that. I don't. Good. We negotiated. The board, now under enormous pressure from investors, agreed to a formal correction of several historical records. They agreed to revise investor materials. They acknowledge my role as founder and creator of the original operational architecture. They also agreed to buy out my remaining equity interest at a valuation determined by an independent process. It wasn't the fortune I might have received if I had retained control, but it was substantial enough to give me financial freedom. More importantly, it was clean. No secret deal. No threat. No blackmail. No sabotage. Just documentation and negotiation. The final condition was that I would not publicly disparage North Star or Lauren as long as they made the agreed corrections and honored the financial terms. I accepted. Some people later asked why I didn't publicly expose everything. Why didn't I go online and tell the whole story? Why didn't I post the emails? Why didn't I destroy Lauren's reputation? The answer is simple. I didn't want her life, I wanted mine. Public revenge would have kept me attached to her forever. I didn't need that. The board eventually replaced Lauren with an outside CEO. She retained a minority financial interest for a while, but her executive authority was gone. The new CEO asked me to stay involved as a consultant. I declined. I offered one meeting to explain the historical architecture and then walked away. I didn't want to become the ghost of the founder haunting every quarterly meeting. North Star survived. That surprised some people. It should. Businesses are rarely one person's property in the emotional sense, even when one person builds the foundation. There were good employees there. There were loyal clients. There were people who had nothing to do with the betrayal. I never wanted them punished for someone else's decisions. Under the new CEO, the company stabilized. Some old processes returned. Some were replaced with better ones. Chain Map was rebuilt by a team rather than treated as something mystical created by a single founder. That part made me proud. Because the whole point of the system had always been to make good operations repeatable. It was never supposed to be my personal magic. Lauren eventually left the company. I heard she started a consulting practice focused on executive communication and organizational transformation. The first time I heard that, I almost laughed. Then I stopped myself. She was allowed to build a new life too. I didn't need to prevent that. My parents had a harder time. My mother wanted everyone to have dinner together. My father wanted to apologize again. I wasn't ready for a family reunion. I told them I needed time. My father respected that. My mother struggled. She said, "She's still your sister." I said, "I know. Can you forgive her?" Eventually. What does that mean? It means I don't want revenge anymore. She looked at me. "You got revenge." I shook my head. No. She lost what she built on a lie. That's different. My mother didn't understand. Maybe she never would. My father did, he nodded quietly. That's fair. The most unexpected apology came from Marcus. We were having coffee one afternoon when he said, "I should have done more." I told him you were scared. Still, you had a family to support. So did you. I smiled. Yeah. He looked at me. You know what I remember most? What? The first year. You used to answer every call. I laughed. That was stupid. Maybe. He smiled. I thought about the old office, the overheated truck, the folding table, the first client, the first employee, the first warehouse. Those memories had been painful for a long time because Lauren had tried to turn them into evidence that I was merely the guy who started the company. Eventually, I realized something. Starting it wasn't a lesser achievement. Starting it was the whole point. I didn't need to pretend I had been perfect. I didn't need to pretend I had done everything. I simply needed the truth to remain the truth. Meridian continued growing. We passed 20 employees, then 30. I hired people smarter than me in areas where I was weak. I created an actual leadership team. I made sure every important process had at least 2 people who understood it. I documented decisions. I encouraged disagreement. And whenever someone said, "You're the founder, so you know best," I corrected them. No, I'm the founder. That's not the same thing. That distinction became one of the core principles of Meridian. The company grew because people were allowed to own their work without needing to steal anyone else's credit. About a year after the settlement, I received an envelope from North Star. Inside was a framed copy of the original incorporation certificate and a letter from the new CEO. The letter said the company had recently completed a historical review and wanted to recognize the people responsible for its early development. My name was listed first. I stared at the certificate for a long time. Then I put it in a drawer. I didn't hang it on the wall. That surprised Priya when she saw it. "Why don't you display it?" she asked. I said, "Because I don't need to." "But it's yours." "Exactly." She laughed. "That's a very founder answer." Maybe. The truth was, I had spent years thinking recognition was something other people could give or take away. Lauren had taught me that lesson in the worst possible way. But she had also accidentally taught me the opposite. If someone can take your identity by withholding recognition, then you never really owned it in the first place. The company mattered. The money mattered. The betrayal mattered. But the part that mattered most was learning that I could walk away from something I'd spent 11 years building and still build again. That was the revenge I hadn't planned. Lauren wanted the title, the room, the presentations, the investor praise, the photographs, the story. She got many of those things for a while. I wanted something different. I wanted to wake up and know that the life I was living belonged to me. I got that. There was one final meeting with Lauren, almost 2 years after I left North Star. It wasn't planned. We ran into each other at a conference in Chicago. I was there with 2 Meridian clients. She was there alone. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she said, "How's your company?" "Good." "How good?" I smiled. "Good enough." She laughed. "Still don't like talking about money." "Not really." She nodded. "Mine isn't going well." I didn't ask why. She continued anyway. "I thought I could do it." "Do what?" "Run North Star." I said nothing. I thought if I had the title, I'd eventually feel like I deserved it. That sentence surprised me. She looked at the floor. "I never told anyone that. You don't have to tell me." "I think I do." She took a breath. "I thought you had something I didn't. I thought if I could take the company, I'd finally stop feeling like your little sister." I looked at her. "You were never little to me." She laughed sadly. "You know what I hate?" "What?" "You didn't fight me." I frowned. "What?" "You didn't fight me." I frowned. "What?" "I wanted you to fight. I wanted you to scream. I wanted you to make me the villain." "Why?" "Because then I could tell myself I was right." I didn't know how to respond. She said, "Instead, you just left." I didn't know what else to do. "You knew." I thought about it. Maybe I had. Maybe somewhere inside me I knew that if I stayed and fought on her terms, I would become exactly what she needed me to become. Angry, defensive, obsessed, desperate to prove my worth. Walking away had been the one thing she couldn't control. She looked at me. "Do you hate me?" "No." "Do you forgive me?" I considered the question. "I don't think forgiveness is something I can give you on demand." She nodded. "Fair. But I don't want anything from you anymore." She looked at me for a long time. "That's probably worse." "For who?" She smiled faintly. "Me." We said goodbye. I didn't hug her. I wasn't ready. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I won't. Not every relationship deserves to return to what it was. Some relationships have to become something different or end. That's part of growing up. The final financial settlement cleared a few months later. I invested some of it into Meridian, some into long-term investments, and some into a house I'd wanted for years but had never felt comfortable buying, because every dollar had always belonged to the next stage of North Star. The first night I slept there, I walked through the empty rooms without furniture. There was nothing special about the house. It wasn't enormous. It wasn't some mansion, but it was mine, and nobody had given me permission to be there. Nobody could vote me out. Nobody could tell me I was too difficult to scale. I stood in the kitchen with a glass of water and thought about the parking lot where this whole story had begun for me, sitting outside North Star while Lauren told me I shouldn't be there. For a long time, I thought that was the moment I lost the company. I don't think that's true anymore. I lost the company years earlier, in all the little moments when I chose silence because speaking up felt selfish. I lost it when I let my sister take credit because correcting her felt uncomfortable. I lost it when I accepted the idea that family loyalty required me to surrender boundaries. I lost it when I assumed that if I did good work, everyone would automatically understand who had done it. Those were my mistakes. Lauren made hers too. The board made theirs. My parents made theirs. The difference is that I eventually stopped trying to control theirs and started taking responsibility for mine. That was the part I never expected revenge to teach me. Revenge isn't always about taking something from the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's about refusing to let them define what happens next. Lauren wanted the company I built. She got it. For a while, she even got the story she wanted. But a story built on credit without understanding doesn't survive contact with reality. Eventually, somebody asks the uncomfortable question. Eventually, a client notices. Eventually, an employee remembers. Eventually, a document gets opened. Eventually, dates matter. Eventually, the person who has been telling everyone that she built the machine has to stand in front of the people who depend on it and explain why she doesn't know how it works. And when that moment came, I didn't have to destroy her. I didn't have to hack anything. I didn't have to steal anything. I didn't have to threaten anyone. I didn't even have to take the company back. I just stopped protecting the lie. That was enough. The last time I drove past the old North Star office, the sign had changed. The company was still there, but the logo was different. I slowed down for a moment and looked through the windshield. I expected to feel angry. I didn't. I remembered the folding table, the overheated truck, the first invoice, the first employee, Mike Redding, telling me I was making an expensive promise. The night I stayed awake until 3 in the morning fixing a shipment problem. The first time we could afford an actual office. The first time I saw our company name printed on a contract. Those memories didn't belong to Lauren. They didn't belong to the board. They didn't belong to the investors. They belonged to me, and that was the final thing she could never take. She had spent years trying to own the story of what I built. In the end, she taught me that the story wasn't the thing I needed to keep. I needed to keep the person who built it. And once I understood that, I could finally drive past the building without needing to stop. And somewhere outside, beyond the reach of the lights, a door handle made a very soft metallic click.